Hi, I'm here with composer Anthony Susi, and I am going to be talking to him about several things that he does as a composer. He is a prolific composer for both band, orchestra, and other groups, and we're going to be talking about some great pieces that he works with. Well, I would like to take a look at your piece, Summer Solitude. Summer Solitude. Move that over. Pull out my score. So I always have questions that I'd like to ask about the piece. So can you start with the title? How did because I also believe that this piece is a commissioned work, correct?
No, this one was not.
Oh, it was premiered. I didn't read that word.
It's okay. That's okay. I'm going to backtrack a little bit because you mentioned about the premiere, how this came about.
Great.
Because we've talked already about, I was a band director, not an orchestra director. So I was commissioned to write a piece called Golden Heart. And it was Torrington High School. And they wrote it, wanted it written for a classmate, an alumnus who died of ovarian cancer at a very young age. And being part of the program was a big thing. So they wanted to have me write a piece to pay tribute to her. And she kept this wonderful blog about her. She was very transparent about everything she went through, all the treatments and the whole time. And she inspired a lot of people. Jessica Salterra is her name. So when I went to write the piece, the director said, because I have a special favor to ask you. So he also directs the string program for Torrington, where he's the band director. He said, I have a really strong group of 4 seniors, like a little string quartet. Or maybe it was a quintet. I think it was a quartet that he said, he goes, can you build in a section in the piece to feature these 4 string players? And I was like, I really want to do this for him, but I was just nervous. I'm like, God, my string methods days are a long time ago. I said, yeah, I'll definitely give it a shot. I said, but once it's done, I said, the version I submit to publishers to try to get this published, that's not going to be in there. Obviously, he goes, oh, I understand. He goes, because that's going to be too specific. So he challenged me to do that. And so I wrote a segment in the middle that featured these 4 string players. And when the whole piece was done and it was performed and everything, I liked the string section. So I had to take it out and pitch the band version, and Grand Mesa did publish the band version, Golden Heart. But then I'm like, this piece could work. The whole piece is strings, not just this middle feature. So that was my first attempt. I just took the band piece I'd already written and wrote it for strings. And when it was done, but the director who commissioned it, myself, were like, yeah, I like the string one even better. So I went to Manchester's orchestra director. I taught in Manchester for 10 years. And the orchestra director was a classmate of mine at Hart. So I said, hey, would you be interested in premiering this piece? And she's like, yeah, this would be cool. And I went in this case, it wasn't commissioned, but I went in several times to meet with the students and discuss the piece and rehearse with them. And they really bought into it. They did a nice job. The performance, we invited the parents, Jessica's parents, to come hear the premiere. So that's how the string thing started, through that. So Summer Solitude. I was in Boy Scouts when I was growing up. And my favorite part about being in Scouts, I wasn't crazy. I never had the desire to be an Eagle Scout. I wasn't in it for the merit badges, but I was in it for the hiking and the camping. And even after Scouts ended, for me and my buddies, we had bonded so much from camping and hiking that to this day, every year we still go backpacking once a year, get out away from everybody else, that solitude. And it's usually summertime or early fall that we do it. So getting out and getting away from people, getting away from technology, getting away from the stresses of work, just for, even if it's for a couple of days, is huge. It's like helps you reset the clock. So the movie On Golden Pond came out around 1980. You remember the movie with Henry Fonda and Jane Fonda? I used to be an usher at a movie theater at the time, so I got to see all the movies. But I loved the soundtrack. Dave Grusin wrote this beautiful piano, and to me, it hit home. This music. So I'm like, oh, I want to write something like that. So I wrote this thing at piano in around 1981. I think I wrote it, and then I finally got my hands on the earliest synthesizers, they were monophonic, they weren't even polyphonic, and they were analog, of course, before the digital. And it was this little Radio Shack Tandy, I think it was an octave and a half. That was all I could afford to get. I was a freshman, I think, at college. And then I started trying to make it sound like strings, and wrote a string part to go with the piano. And because it was monophonic, I'd have to record one track on a cassette player, play it back on that cassette player, and had a second boombox to record the next layer. And somewhere on a cassette, I have the original version was piano and this synthesized strings. But that's when the piece was written. And I was talking earlier about pitching pieces. So that sat there for a while. And then in the mid 90s, I started listening to some of the new age artists, John Tesh and Yanni and Jim Brickman, which started to become really popular. And as a piano player, it appealed to me. So I was listening to a lot of their music. And I said, I want to try to write do an instrumental album, because everything I'd done to that point was not instrumental, other than that one piece that I wrote back, in 81 or 82, right around that. So I recorded it again, because now I had a chord keyboard, had, sampled strings. It sounded so much better than my original version. And it's on this CD, from 1994, no, maybe it's 90, 96. So it's on here. And then left that alone. And then after writing that string piece for Torrington and having Manchester play it, then I was like looking for material, and I went back to the archives. Out comes this, and I'm like, now I want to try to write this and have it, and that's the whole story behind Summer Solitude. And the interesting is the other piece of string piece you liked of mine, Missing You.
Mm-hmm.
When I did Summer Solitude first, oh no, which one came first? Yeah, it was Summer Solitude. There's a part in there that I thought was too technical, because I did it for band first, as a band guy, of course. And I was like, this is gonna be too hard for wind players to do. So I took a section out of Summer Solitude that I originally had in there when I wrote it for the band and for strings. Then when I wrote Missing You, it wasn't long enough. And I was like, I got that piece from Summer Solitude that I think, because they're both minor key songs, that I can plug in there. And it did, it fit, it worked nicely. So Missing You has part of the original version of Summer Solitude in it. So.
And I think that's a great demonstration of how you cut and paste different pieces, because you don't just have it in your head and you write it down. I mean, we always think of Mozart being able to flawlessly write his symphonies, but no one really does that. So that's a perfect example of how you change it to make it fit and work. Yeah, that's great. So
Yeah.
On your Summer Solitude, I do want to ask you about the edited, because as string players, we see a lot of arrangements, but we don't see edited. So can you explain that to us?
Absolutely. So again, being a band guy, winds and percussion is my forte. Bowings is not my forte. And technique things too. I have a good idea of what the ranges are, and I understand first position and third position and all of that. And when I'm writing for a certain level, to keep that in mind in terms of the range that the students are playing in. But definitely the main thing that needed the editing was the articulations in the bowings are very different for strings than when I'm writing. I have a good handle on what wind players would tongue or slur, and you don't have to worry about where they would put breath marks in for their phrasing. But for string players, as you know, the down bows, the up bows, and then also plays into not just the phrasing, but where you want the weight and the more volume to come from. So that's where Cameron Law, string expert, and he's the chief editor, or was the chief editor for Grand Mesa Music. Actually, he still is, because he's editing one of my pieces right now. Yeah, Grand Mesa's been going through some changes as the person who started retired recently. But yeah, Cameron actually is still doing the editing for it. And Sarah Siegler has just taken over the string department for that. But that's why it says edited by, because the bowings that are his, and the articulations that he suggested are his in there. Every once in a while, like the last piece is an example. I might disagree and we'll talk, and he came up with a great compromise. There was a section in the piece we just did the proofs for, where again, not being a string player, I had the bass players doing double stops, and he put it in the cello, and I was like, but that's in a different register, and I don't like how that overlaps with what the violas are doing there. He goes, yeah, but it's going to be muddy, and if the cellos do those double stops. And Sarah also agreed, who's the new head of the strings. So he's like, oh, I got a compromise. He goes, let's take that note and put it in it was an A, that was the upper note and the double stop for the basses, and let's give it to the cello, and that'll be the A for them. It won't sound as muddy. And that was a perfect example of where we compromised on some of the editing, and it still got that register I was going for, but without putting it in the basses, putting it in the cello. Yeah, so yeah, definitely rely on the input of string teachers and string players for things like that,
Well, I noticed at the beginning of Summer Solitude, you do have the people that don't have the melody pizzicatoing. Was that something that you wanted them to do?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I did, because going back to, I told you how I originally wrote it. So originally wrote the whole thing on piano, then mentioned how then I got the following year, I got this little synthesizer monophonic thing, wrote strings to go with it. Then in the 90s, I got a real nice chord keyboard. So besides the strings, I had harp originally and so on this version, you'll hear it piano, harp, and strings. And there's some flute and clarinet and stuff in there as well. It's more like full orchestra, the version I did here. So I was I wanted to keep that harp type of opening with it. And the pizzicato was it. And then I was like, well, I got to find the right key, because I wanted as many of the notes to be on open strings, so they would be more simulate the harp. If they were going to be, what's the term? If you're plucking a string and you're pressing a fret, it's not going to have the same resonance as an open string. So if you notice, a lot of the notes that it fell into in this particular key, it fell into place. That there's a good amount of open notes that help it simulate the harp. So I'm glad you asked that, actually. So that's where the pizzicato that came in from.
Well, it explains, because I was looking at I call them like the energy patterns that drives a piece forward. Some people call it rhythm patterns, but I think for my kids, that confuses them. The energy patterns that you use are very similar to a harp. And now that I can see that, because a little later you have sustained notes, and still it's harp-like-ish, but you can see that it's not quite as harpish as the beginning. So that's a really important thing for the students to know. Why did you write it in 3/4?
Because it's in 3. I mean, the piece has that feeling of 3. It's definitely not do you feel it in a different?
No.
Oh, okay.
But so many pieces are written in 4/4 that anytime I see a piece written in 3/4, it's like, were they going for like a waltz or?
You know what? Now I got to think about this for a minute. I got to think of the On Golden Pond theme if I can get it in my head. I'm wondering if it's in 3/4. I don't know. That can load it in my brain like right now. Possibly that was why that I was trying to emulate what Dave Grusin had done. I don't know. I don't remember. Something I'm not sure it's in 3/4, but I couldn't tell you right without seeing the music in front of me at the moment.
But I'll say
it goes back to that, that I just had this idea of trying to do something similar and capture my feelings when I'm out in the summertime in the wilderness with my buddies. And in fact, the cover for some people, and I made note of that in the program notes, Summer Solitude for them is being on a beach by themselves, that openness, and I get that. But the cover I picked for it is more represents this is a soul person sitting on this edge of a cliff looking out over the wilderness. That's my vision, but everyone's going to have their own vision. They may picture themselves, like I said, on a desolate beach when they hear that.
And I think having it in 3/4 just gives it a more lilting feeling than a 4/4, which would be kind of Marchy.
I don't think when I was 18 or 19, then I was thinking like that. Now, if I wrote a piece, I'd be thinking like, what's going to give it a lilting feeling? So that was per chance, but thank you. Thank you.
Well, I had to, when I was listening to it, and my students are going to play this one because I really love it.
Awesome.
I was thinking to myself, this sounds a lot like Copeland because there's just a lot of the way you're using the melody is very Copelandish. And when you say that, it's like, well, what does that really mean? And I could not define it. But when you said that you listen to Copeland every night, oh, that's really deep into your psyche.
There's a lot of my pieces definitely have Copeland's influence on them. Not all of them, but a good amount of them for sure. Yeah.
It's just funny how we absorb that into ourselves.
Yeah.
So do you think of this piece as two separate sections? Do you think of it as one big character? When I talk to my students about the melody, we always try to decide if it's one character going through a story or if it's different characters. I always talked about Harry Potter, how it says Harry Potter's the main character, but you can't have it without Hermione and Ron. So do you think of the melody as just one character that's going through several things?
One person's emotions, like, so the idea of solitude being by yourself, and that when you're by yourself, whether it be on a beach, hiking in the woods, you have all this time to reflect on your life, on your feelings. And so this is sort of like this melody's kind of going through different emotions and maybe conjure up different images too. You're thinking back. That's basically all I was going for in there, is just capturing that sense of not because being by yourself, for some people, I didn't want it to sound lonely, because I didn't want the piece to make it sound like you were lonely, just that you were alone. Just everyone was trying to go for that. That's why it has a very quiet beginning with, notice the melody is in just the violin, everything else is accompaniment. So I'm trying to set the stage that it's someone by themselves. That's a solitude. And then the other instruments switch over from pizzicato to arco or bowing and make it warmer and richer. But that's just all. Once the melody got going, I was just taking it through the kind of emotions I was feeling at the time. That wasn't, again, because I was younger. I think the less, I don't want to say knowledge isn't the word, but a lot of the early stuff I write, and I've heard other composers say the same thing, and I'm talking about now pop composers. They like some of their best work they like was their early stuff, because you didn't let theory or structure or form. In this case, we're talking about form. I didn't understand, or I wasn't thinking about form when I wrote a lot of my early stuff. And it came back later. I learned it the hard way with my pop stuff. They were like, you got great musical ideas and I like your lyrics, but the form, they're like, dude, listen, pay attention to the form of what's on the radio. And I was like, oh, okay, so it should have an intro and a verse and another verse, and then the chorus and a verse and a chorus, and then it needs a bridge, and then bring the chorus back twice. Like I wasn't thinking at all like that. I was just sitting down wanting to write a song about whatever love thing I was writing at the time, and just pouring it out there and not really thinking hard enough about form. So I've actually re-recorded a number of pieces that I did early on and shifted the form to kind of put it more into that box of what's radio friendly.
Yeah.
And so what you're asking about this too, I was not thinking about form. Now when I write, because I'm so much more aware of it, I am definitely thinking about form of any piece that I'm writing, and length in terms of what level it's written for. You're not going to write a 7-minute piece for a grade 2 band or orchestra, and nor are you going to write a grade 5 or 4 piece that's only 2 minutes long, unless it's some fanfare for an advanced group. But back when I wrote this, form and length, I wasn't thinking, because I wasn't writing it for anybody but myself at the time. Whereas now when I write, I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be for middle school. So I got to think about all these parameters. This is the ranges. These are the keys they can play in. These are the time signatures. All that's important now. when I wrote that, I wasn't thinking, like you said, about 3/4. Why'd you pick 3/4? I don't know. Did you have the melody? Is this? I wasn't. You're kind of making me think back, like reflect myself about early writing. And yeah, I wasn't thinking about those things then. And now I have a different mindset when I'm writing.
Do you find having those restrictions or blocks harder to create?
Not harder to create, but whenever you go outside the box, it often has turned out to be we like the piece, but no, well, I'll give you an example. Nocturnal Creatures, pitched it. I won't use specific publishers' names, but the publishers love the piece, love the concept. But to us, this is a middle school concept. There's nocturnal creatures in the way you tell the story. So you got to make it technically easier. So I tried. I went back and I rewrote it, tried to not dumb it down, but took some of the technical things out, repitched it, and then they still got some technical things that are too hard, and so we don't think it's we're going to pass on it. They wanted it to be a middle school piece. I couldn't take that piece. It needed to be more advanced, and from my, like, what I was trying to say through the music. And I tried, and I did repitch them, and but that hasn't always been the case. It's the newest string piece coming out this year with Grand Mesa, A Joyous Sleigh Ride. When I pitched it the first time, not being a string player, they're like, "Oh, we like this. It's a great idea." I basically took Joy to the World, and this is funny that you mentioned about my Copeland influence, and I love rodeo and the hoedown from rodeo. So I created a hoedown of my own in the style of Copeland's rodeo. No doubt, I say that in my program notes. I'm not denying that at all. And I took Handel's Joy to the World and put them together, because I was like, I think not everybody may be like me, but I'm tired of hearing Sleigh Ride every concert every year. I like the idea of a song that's like about a sleigh ride is wonderful, but maybe we need something new. So that's my angle. I was like, a new sleigh ride that's Americana still, but so it's called the Joyous Sleigh Ride. But anyways, I pitched it. Grand Mesa was like, "Okay, we like the piece, but it drones in D. You got to get the cellos and the basses. They're just droning along in D, drone." Because think about those open fifths and fourths. I got him doing that, and I got the violins and violas playing all this nice, great fiddle stuff. But I take a hard look at it. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty boring. Cello bass, it just drones on. I can see it. It's not. So I rewrote it, and then I put a modulation in there, and I totally went back and put much more melodic things for the bass and the cello in there, and repitched it. And then they're like, that's what now you got it. So
it almost sounds like they're choosing the high school music, but if the title seems like Nocturnal Creatures, that's got to be
that was just one particular
school.
example. Yeah, not all the time, but that was just one example where rewriting it and trying to think about the parameters got a little bit in the way. Sometimes disagreement on the grade level of music. Published, it's not as consistent as I mean, there's a great chart, that lists what should be for each grade level that the American Band College puts out every, in Band World magazine. I use that as a guideline, but still all the publishers still have their own guidelines. Yeah. So it can be challenging sometimes to have to keep in a certain range or certain rhythms. But you learn. I mean, you learn what's going to sell and what's going to be a risk. And the riskier stuff, I start self-publishing. And the stuff that's more generic to the formula and all that for each grade level music. That's the stuff I pitch to the publishers.
When you think about yourself as a composer, you have a wide range of pieces, but is there something that you think of yourself as, I'm a composer of, is it, and I'm not talking band music or orchestra music, it's just, how would you describe your compositions?
I like to write a lot of music that comes from personal experience, or unless they're commissions, and then it's coming from the experience of the ensemble. I don't know if I'm answering the question correctly. I know what styles I can't do. Like in the pop world, like I have no business trying to write anything like Hamilton. I love that music, but I wouldn't even know where to start with hip hop and rap and all that. Yet one of my sons has done at least 3, maybe 4 albums of hip hop rap, and he's great at it. He certainly didn't get that from me. But so I kind of focus on the genres that I feel comfortable with, and genres that I listen to. Like what am I listening to? That tends to, like Copeland was an example, that tends to come back. I mentioned the new age composers at the time that influenced the New Horizons CD. It's who I'm listening to at the time, whose music is touching me. I'm always looking at, why do I like this piece so much? I started doing a lot more of that with what I'm writing. And then I really do some serious score study of those composers' music. And I'm like, oh, this is what they're doing, that, you know, that's hitting a chord. And then I try to work that into my own music, you know.
That's one of the things I've recognized just even lately, is how global our music is becoming. It really is. You can't really define yourself as what kind of a musician too easily, because you're always bringing in something else from somebody other genre or something.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because something that's been driving what I've been composing the last 2 years, this whole, I might even started about 3 years ago, but in our state music education chapter, they have a division now called the Equity Initiative. And it was trying to do more things to bring awareness and incorporate more multicultural music, and not just the music written by old dead white guys, which makes up the huge body of literature that's been played. And not that it's bad stuff, but it's not representative. It's not representative of the classroom, the diversity at all. And I was looking at my own music and the music I listen to, I'm like, yeah, I totally agree with this. And I really want to be a part of that. So a lot of the new stuff, recent stuff, I should say, that I've written is inspired by that. I took part of the Black Lives Matter movement too. I was looking at spirituals that were being sung at some of these protests that also were sung in the civil rights era of the 60s, and then traced all the way back that were sung during the Civil War. And I'm like, these are the gems I want to start with. So went through probably a dozen spirituals and played around with them. What I was looking for, one of the things I like to do, I've done in a good number of my pieces, I like to find songs I can partner, or sometimes even in 3-way. And I found 3 spirituals that I'm like, I can partner these 3 spirituals in all kinds of creative ways. So it's Don't Let Nobody Turn You Around, Joshua Fought the Battle of Jericho, and Wade in the Water. So I took those 3, but I didn't want them to be presented serious traditional, because it's been done. First of all, I wanted to do something different. There's a lot of that. Those songs have been done in their traditional form. So I want to do a big band arrangement, big band swing, like sing, 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 Gene Krupa drums and a whole bit, and take those songs and swing them, but partner them up, but also but keep them in not like destroy the melody, but in any way they're there intact, all 3 melodies, so that directors can do some background with the students on these pieces and some historical context to it, and be teaching a good big band swing piece. So that's one of them. It's called Righteous Refrains, and it's coming out through Excelsior Music this spring. And I just got asked this week to direct a honors middle school jazz band, and I said, oh, can I do this piece? They're like, yeah. Like, yes. So this group will get to premiere it. And then another one was the Lift Every Voice and Sing. So I wasn't familiar with that. Choral directors would know this, but there's not very many instrumental versions of that for band that are. So that's why I wasn't familiar with the piece. And I look at it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this piece was designated as the national anthem of the NAACP before our country even had an official national anthem. Like, this is powerful. Why hasn't this been done that much for just like band or orchestra? So there's a zillion choral arrangements. So I tackled that, and I wrote it so that it could be. I have string version for orchestra with optional piano accompaniment. I have a band version with piano accompaniment, and I believe I wrote a flex adaptable version of that. So I thought this would be something right now that would meet that need. And then I went on a vacation in September. It was called the Enchanted Canyonlands, and it was a tour of the Utah, Arizona, all the Canyonlands. It was an 8-day trip. I was like, oh my gosh, I was so inspired. I got to write something. So I'm like, okay, still, there's so little Native American music that's been written for a concert band. So I delved into lots of finding as many pieces from tribes from that region, trying them all out, again, looking for what could be put together and represent, so it's got some Hopi or Happy and Navajo, and I can't remember the third tribe top of my head. And there's 4 or 5 songs, and it starts out with the sunrise call. It was I think that was a Navajo piece, and it ends with the sunset piece, and then everything in between that would happen. There's a snake dance. There's I can't think of the other. I think there's 5 Native American pieces in there, and I submitted it to Grand Mesa. Just had their first international song competition, and it was a runner-up, but I didn't get the final. But he said, "Don't feel bad, Tony, because we had 125 entries." I'm like, because and you were a runner-up. I'm like, all right. So it's and so it's called Dwellers of the Canyonlands, and it's got authentic Native American music, and I try to put a lot of it in its traditional form. There's chanting that the band would do, the actual Indian chant. There's a lot of hand drums that they would have used. There is, instead of the flute, there's optional recorder to simulate more the type of wind instrument they would be playing, not the modern flute. A lot of little things like that. There's clapping in it. There's body percussion. So I'm trying to do more multicultural music to meet that need, and that's something I didn't really look at till literally in the last 2 years closely of what I was doing.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see where music education goes for the next couple of years. I want to thank you for interviewing with us, and
Thank you.
You have some great things to share with us. I'm looking forward to having other people hear this interview. So thank you.